Today we are here to discuss three important matters that have been a major part of my administration's work over the past 112 days. First, our record funding for education. Second, the urgent need to protect the pensions of state employees, teachers, and retirees in Maryland. And third, our primary mission of bringing fiscal responsibility to our state government. On education, people have been seeing an amazing number of stories in the news lately that simply are not true. And I want to set the record straight today. Special interest groups, like the Teachers Union, have launched heavily financed smear campaigns, spreading a lot of misinformation about education funding. That's just not true. Here are the facts. Number one, at $6.1 billion, we have invested more money in education than ever before in the history of our state, including an additional $109 million increase over last year. Adding $109 million more to education next year is not a cut, it's an increase in spending on education. Number two, because of the fiscal crisis that we inherited, many people expected us to zero out school construction funding. In fact, I think there were TV commercials about that. Instead, we've put $318 million more into building and revitalizing our schools, more than was allocated by my predecessor's fiscal 2015 budget. Number three, we also added an additional $68 million in optional GCEI bonus funding for education, marking the first time in history that any administration has ever provided any of this discretionary supplemental funding for education in their first year. The Speaker of the House and others in the General Assembly who are criticizing us for adding this $68 million into GCEI are the same people who voted 6 times to not put any money into it at all. My predecessor put nothing into GCEI his first year and funded it at only 30% his second year. One vocal senator, Richard Madaleno, said in 2009, and I quote, "In this current economic climate, the budget will not fund GCEI. These trying times call for shared sacrifice, and I believe the governor has his eyes firmly fixed on what is in the best interest, the best long-term interest of all of Maryland's children." Well, we're once again in tough economic times. The only thing that has changed is who sits in the governor's office. Recently, the misleading rhetoric has shifted to wording such as, "Why won't the governor just release the money?" I'm sure you've all heard that or read that somewhere. Well, there is no magical pot of money that can simply be released or doled out. They're asking us to rob from the pension funds that belong to state employees, teachers, and retirees in order to have further increases in the bonus funding that we have already provided. Under my administration, education investment is at a record high. It is our top priority. But it takes more than just money to solve all of the problems we have in education. My administration is committed to improving and to fully funding education at every level, and we have put our money where our mouth is. Anyone who says differently is simply being dishonest. But what we won't do, what we will not do, is rob the pensions of Maryland citizens at the demand of special interest groups and politicians who repeatedly choose to just throw more and more money, more and more of our hard-earned tax dollars at problems instead of actually focusing on finding real solutions. We currently face $18.7 billion, that's billion with a B, in unfunded pension liabilities. But in the last few years, the General Assembly has ignored this reality and slashed pension contributions by another $625 million just since 2012. It is absolutely irresponsible, and it will not continue on my watch. Protecting those pensions is part of my responsibility, and it is a necessary step in putting an end to the budgetary tricks and shell games that have put our state on the path to financial peril. The budget we proposed in January was balanced, and it would have even delivered a small surplus next year. But what the legislature left us with at the end of the legislative session was a $1.7 billion deficit over the next 4 years, including a $200 million shortfall just for next year. That is simply unacceptable. I was elected to provide the fiscal discipline that Maryland taxpayers expect and deserve. And while I firmly believe that we have begun to change the debate here in Annapolis, it is clear that many out-of-touch politicians simply have not gotten the message. Unfortunately, there's still a huge disconnect between the politicians in Annapolis and the rest of Maryland. Our administration will continue to work diligently to rein in spending and will continue to fight to change the status quo in Annapolis. I remain committed to working with the General Assembly to find bipartisan common sense solutions that will put our state back on firm financial ground. But we cannot continue to make the same financial mistakes that got us into this fiscal mess in the first place.